Hello and welcome to the Girls Fuel podcast. My name is Haley. I'm a registered dietitian and nutrition coach here to help you along your health and fitness journey by providing evidence and experience based knowledge. And as always, full transparency. Today, Jess and I, we are back with a really fun topic that I think will hit home for a lot of you. We are going to talk about period poop. How do your poops change around your period? PMS and the gut hormone connection. So, Jess, I would love for you to kick us off with this topic of what are period poops? Why are we even talking about this?
Yeah, so I'm really excited to talk about this. I think period poops is commonly talked about, but it's often misunderstood. Like when I first heard of period poops, I was like, oh, it just means you get diarrhea near your period. But it's actually so much more than that. So it's not just diarrhea, it's having loose stool. Yes, diarrhea, constipation, smellier poop, more like irregular trips to the bathroom, excess gas and things like that. So when I was younger, I was like, I don't get period poops, but I actually had a ton of constipation near and around my periods. Period poop isn't just diarrhea. It's so many more things. And it's mostly just irregular bowel habits, loose stool, constipation, and things like that. Period poops, it's a common PMS or symptom, and it's usually caused by fluctuations in hormones in and around your period. And it can have something to do with your diet because a lot of people have a ton of cravings during their period. My question usually is what is your diet like in and around your period? Can you control those cravings? Because a lot of the time, those are some harder things to control. What would you say?
I see a lot of different presentations of digestive irregularity around my clients' cycles, but I will say the most common thing that I will see, and when we say cycle, we're talking week by week throughout the course of the month. And when we say
Yeah.
period, obviously that's our bleeds. For a lot of my clients, and this is something I've experienced as well, I will see some constipation leading up to the bleed itself. So that's usually when we're in that PMS window, whether that's 7 days before. For some women, unfortunately, it's longer, it's 7 to 10, where for a lot of women, it's less. It might just be a day or 2 before or 3 to 5 days before your period's supposed to hit. We will see some constipation and some slowdown with digestion, and we're gonna get into a little bit more of, like, why that happens, and again, it is a lot of times related to hormones. However, if you have a GI issue, all of this is going to be exacerbated, right? So, I know for me personally, I always used to be constipated, like, constipated to the point where I would contemplate taking a laxative. Like, I didn't go to the bathroom barely at all for the whole week before my period, like, maybe once, and it was so uncomfortable. It felt so full of shit, just, like, all the time. Plus, you're getting full of blood. It is just not a fun time. So if you're a man, listen to this, please be thankful that you don't have to go through this process every month. But one thing I've noticed since really supporting and fixing my gut and my liver health, which we'll talk about, is that
Yes.
I don't get constipated before my cycle anymore. I will still notice a little bit of increased motility once my cycle has come. So for a lot of my clients, this is what we see. We'll see constipation right before the cycle. And then usually once it hits, things either normalize or you may have a little bit of looseness for a few days. And especially if you have constipation before, a lot of the looseness is like a rebound, right? And this can happen even when we're not expecting our cycle, where I'm sure you've had this happen where you don't go for a few days, and all of a sudden you go 4 times, or it's really loose and your body just has to make up for it. But Jess, I like how you mentioned the changes to diet around our cycle, because there are specific things that we can purposely do with our diet to support our cycle. But I
Yes.
know personally, and with a lot of our clients, we find the luteal phase, so leading into that bleed, second half of the cycle is when we're craving the chocolate. Our inhibitions are a little bit lower. We're a little bit more irritable. We're craving the snackies. And that's not a
Yes.
bad thing. It's just really balancing it with those foods that you know are going to support you. So, Jess, I'd love for you to go into why do we have this fluctuation? Like, why do these period poops, quote unquote, happen?
Yeah. So in and around your period, there are fluctuations in progesterone, estrogen, and prostaglandin. And so I'm going to explain each of these hormones and the changes that happen and how they influence gut motility. And so I'll start off by talking about prostaglandins. Your body produces prostaglandins before your period, and this is to help your uterus contract and shed its lining. But when you have excess levels of prostaglandins, they can have an effect outside of your uterus too, and affect other parts of your body and that usually have smooth muscles. So this can increase diarrhea. And then there's progesterone. So progesterone will increase in your luteal phase. And this is what starts your PMS symptoms. So I also want to say that for people who use their Oura rings or body temperature, heart rate, you may notice that those increase in your luteal phase as well. And usually during this phase, like Haley said, you will experience irritability, mood swings, maybe even skin issues. So a little bit more acne, maybe like cystic acne. I know that's something that I've struggled with before. Even breast tenderness. A lot of people experience different symptoms. So it's really going to depend on the person. Progesterone can also decrease the speed and the function of your digestive system. This is going to cause constipation. Most of my clients suffer with constipation. I don't know about you, Haley, but for 3 of my clients right now, we have a luteal phase plan. This isn't about cycle syncing, and there's even like seed cycling, but it's more about making small changes to maybe your diet, to lifestyle, adding in teas, cruciferous vegetables, paying attention to your liver health a little bit more, paying attention to blood sugar. So I'll get into that a little bit more in a little bit, but those are the hormones that are changing. And depending on the person, you could experience diarrhea or more constipation.
For sure. And with the prostaglandins, we want to know that those aren't a hormone. Those are a lipid that can act almost like a hormone, where our progesterone and our estrogen, those are the two main hormones that are fluctuating. So, like Jess mentioned with the progesterone increase, this is a good thing. Like, we need this to happen. Most women have low progesterone due to stress, due to diet history. We won't get into that now, but during this period of time, progesterone, when it increases, it is causing muscles to relax, which is a fabulous thing. But as a result, contractions of both the uterus and the GI tract are going to be varied. And this is where we might see a little bit of that slowdown. But this is where, too, we might also see with estrogen dominance, if we have high levels
Yes.
of estrogen, we are going to likely see an exacerbation of PMS symptoms around the cycle, maybe heavier bleeding, more painful bleeds. And as far as how that impacts the bowels, that will depend on the person. But all of this that really does tie into that gut hormone connection, right? Because in most cases, it's not the hormones directly causing GI issues. It's both goes both ways. And if you do have an existing GI issue, you're going to often eventually, unfortunately, have downstream hormone issues because our gut is responsible for detoxification. It is responsible for getting rid of excess hormones. So this is where we'll often work with our clients to make specific changes to their diet around their cycle if they need to. Like Jess mentioned, we don't
Yeah.
really go too hard into the whole cycle syncing thing. We more so teach our girls how to auto regulate and how to listen to their body so they know
Yeah.
intuitively what changes to make with training, with diet, with
Yeah.
biofeedback, right? I know Jess and I talk about this a lot because our cycles have synced up because we talk so much, which is crazy that that really
That's a
is
real
a
thing.
thing,
That's
considering
a real thing, I
you're
swear.
literally in Canada and I haven't seen you in months. So our cycles sync up and we notice major differences together in like our mood, our focus, our attention. And it sucks in a way, but we found ways to manage it for ourselves as well as for our clients. But just who would you say, like from your experience, who's most likely to struggle with these digestive issues around their cycle or period poops, as we'll call it?
Yeah. And so females, especially who suffer with IBS, are definitely more susceptible
My bad.
IBS. Sorry. IBS is just what doctors use to explain a number of different symptoms that can be explained by a specific condition. Usually, people with IBS, we see like infections, dysbiosis, and a number of other things going on. It's not a real diagnosis.
No, that's why we
uh,
laughed. If you're not watching the video, we both just air quoted when we said IBS, just to keep everybody who's listening to the recording only up to speed.
Other women who are more susceptible to period poops would be women with endometriosis, ovarian cysts, PCOS, fibroids, and things like that, who will be more susceptible to period poops. Haley, can you explain why women with PCOS and ovarian cysts are more susceptible to period poops?
Yeah, definitely. One of the biggest factors with those two in particular is our inflammation, right? Both PCOS and the ovarian cysts. And again, this is not an episode about PCOS. Didn't we do one?
I don't think we have, but we definitely should.
I think I've done one in the past, but yeah, we'll have
Oh,
the completed
but I
one
didn't. Yeah.
on like PCOS and how it connects to the gut fully. But they cause all it's like one of those things. Is it the chicken or the egg thing where the PCOS is thought to be related to excess testosterone? The diagnostic criteria there is usually gonna be you have to have at least, I believe it's 2 out of the 3, right? Ovarian cyst is one thing, so you might go to your doctor and they're like, "You
Yeah.
have high androgens on your blood work," and then like, those symptoms of PCOS. Body hair growth, irregular cycles, but both of those things cause issues with hormone levels and inflammation in the body, which not only affects smooth muscle function, like we've talked about, our smooth muscles in our GI tract, how peristalsis happens or doesn't, how our bowels release or don't, as well as just an overall response of our nervous system, which directly controls GI mobility. So, we're actually going to record another podcast on this today, but a lot of individuals with PCOS may also experience insulin resistance. And blood sugar regulation directly impacts gut health, vice versa, through the process of inflammation, right? When we have such a high level of inflammation in the body, in the gut, this interferes with the function of our vagus nerve. And our vagus nerve, we've talked about this before, is that very long nerve
Mhm.
that hangs out from our brainstem all the way down the other end through our GI tract. And it is directly responsible for motility. And there are so many things that impact it, right? It's not just stress or insulin resistance, but when we have insulin resistance or increased stress in general in the body, like we will with hormone imbalances or and even GI infections, the vagus nerve function is not optimal, and that can cause a reduction of gut motility, so slowing of motility, which can, downstream lead to SIBO, lead to gastroparesis, and all of these other issues. We also know that with PCOS, it's not uncommon to see and same with cysts, it's not uncommon to see high levels of progesterone. So this is where
Yeah.
Jess mentioned this earlier. High levels of progesterone can cause constipation, right? And when we have cysts, PCOS, or even we could say an estrogen dominance, the presence of the excess hormone, be that androgen, be that progesterone, or with estrogen dominance, it's estrogen, that directly impacts the bowels in a different way. And unfortunately, as women, we already have cyclical fluctuation. So this is where if you're not already doing so, making sure that you're tracking your cycle. So you should know, when am I expecting a period? When am I expecting to have PMS, quote unquote? When am I expected to ovulate? Not only so that you can be aware of fertility, maybe prevent pregnancy naturally, but also so that way you can give yourself peace of mind if you are having symptoms around those times. You can start to connect the dots. And this is what we do with our clients. We'll have them track data. So that way we can connect the dots to better understand some of these fluctuations. But another thing to mention when it comes to the gut hormone connection is the gut brain axis and how much hormone imbalances can impact that, both with some of these extremes like the PCOS, even endometriosis, estrogen dominance, but also just in general throughout our cycle. So we have the HPA axis, which is what helps us produce cortisol or
Yeah.
helps us keep cortisol levels at bay. If there is stress in the body, be that due to a hormone imbalance, be that due to life, because life has stress, right? We all have our different stressors. We're not really going to go into that right now, but the HPA will produce cortisol, and that can slow down digestion, diverting blood flow away from the GI tract, leading to slower motility, constipation, and bloating. So this is where, not to get on too big of a tangent here, it's important to understand like all pieces of the puzzle for your own body, right? Understanding where your blood glucose is at, understanding if you have insulin resistance or not, understanding where your hormone levels are, and understanding what your GI symptoms are so we can connect all of the dots together.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're going to end up spending so much time and money trying to fix one thing when really there's a lot of things, and that's a side tangent for you, but hopefully that answered the gist of your question.
Yeah. And I don't think women listening to this, you are not a lost cause if you have
No.
been diagnosed with IBS, PCOS, ovarian cysts. Like these can be managed with lifestyle, diet, supplementation, right? You are not a lost cause and these things can be managed. I completely reversed my IBS. I think at one point I was definitely susceptible to insulin resistance, like PCOS like symptoms, but these things can be managed. I want all the listeners to know that as well.
They can be managed, but they can also be reversed, just like you said.
Exactly.
Once we get to
Mhm.
the root cause of why do you have IBS, why do you have PCOS, which
Yes,
just
yes,
grinds my
yes.
gears to no end that doctors don't ask these questions. And some practitioners don't even ask them, or they don't ask them the right way. But like, why are you having these things? Let's dive into the mechanisms. Let's dive into what actually started this so we can take a step back and make it go away more or less. But
Yes, 100% agree.
as far as I would say, let's do a quick overview of a little bit more of the gut hormone connection. We don't want to go too deep here, but then we'll dive into tips to overcome period poops, balance out those bowel movements, and just address improving gut health and hormones as a base. So, Jess, want to take it off with what other aspects of digestion and hormones interact with one another? Because again, it is at
Yeah.
times a chicken or the egg situation. I would say,
Mm.
I'm curious your thoughts on this. I would say my belief is that 90+% of the time it's the gut that starts it.
Yeah, yeah. So many times, and I remember thinking about this too. What is it? My gut or my hormones? Are my hormones causing all my symptoms? Is it my gut that's causing all my symptoms? Like, chances are it is both. And sometimes, we can't pinpoint one or the other, but I agree with you. Like, we need to target the gut first. What is going on there? Because, yes, of course, like gut can affect hormones, hormones can affect gut. But if there are imbalances, infections, things like that just needs to be targeted first in order to understand really what's going on with the hormone. So I think we're on the same page with that. But when we are talking about from a gut standpoint and how that is impacting our hormones, the first thing I want to talk about is low stomach acid. So when we have low stomach acid, that can impact our nutrient absorption and how we are absorbing and assimilating nutrients from food. If we are not absorbing those nutrients from food, then we're not getting the proper nutrients that we need to function optimally for our hormones to function optimally. Then that impacts down the chain in terms of motility. So low stomach acid and motility are very connected. Low stomach acid is usually impacts motility in terms of low motility. So when there are estrogen and progesterone fluctuations that can influence bowel movements. And like we said, when progesterone is higher, that is going to impact low motility and more constipation. And then when we get into leaky gut, that increases inflammation in the body and can also disrupt hormonal imbalances. And so I think we've talked so much about leaky gut and how that increases inflammation. But leaky gut is when the intestinal lining can basically can come apart and can allow food particles to enter into the bloodstream, which increases an inflammatory response in the body. When we get that inflammatory response, that can increase gut dysbiosis. And so when we have gut dysbiosis, we have an imbalance of bacteria in the gut. And when we have this imbalance of bacteria in the gut, usually what we see on a ton of GI maps is increased B-glucuronidase. And this is an enzyme produced by bacteria in the gut. And what happens is it breaks the bond between estrogen and glucuronic acid. And we need glucuronic acid. It is so estrogen is bound to glucuronic acid. It makes it water soluble. And we want to excrete excess estrogen out of the body. But when glucuronidase is elevated, we know that estrogen is not being excreted properly. So this is when we see symptoms of estrogen dominance and we see worsening PMS symptoms, weight gain, acne, and things like that. So that's one of the most common things I see is that gut dysbiosis increasing beta-glucuronidase and increasing estrogen dominant symptoms. Lastly, I want to talk about constipation again. And so when we have constipation, that stool in your gut can be reabsorbed in the body, which is why with my clients, the number one thing I'm telling them is the number one thing we need to do is to get you pooping because that's going to influence your hormone detoxification. And we don't want that buildup of toxins or bad bacteria in the gut. I feel like I just went on a huge tangent. So, Haley, what would you add to that?
No, I thought that was great. And the big thing to note here is a lot of these things go together, right? A lot of times we'll have low stomach acid, we'll have leaky gut, we'll have dysbiosis in combination, unfortunately. And that's where figuring out which of those things are going on for you is going to be really important. So, quick minute to highlight our free gut quiz. So, we created a quiz that gets to the bottom of where the imbalances in your gut might be, whether you have gut symptoms or not. Because I think you get the point by the end of this podcast that you don't necessarily have to have GI symptoms to have GI issues, right? They can present as hormone symptoms. So if you haven't already done so, go to one of our Instagram bios and take our gut quiz. It literally takes 2 minutes. And that way you'll get a customized PDF from us that breaks down what specifically you can be doing to support whether it's low stomach acid, whether it's leaky gut, whether it's dysbiosis, and everything from there. But like just mentioned, it really does go both ways. And one of the big things to note is the impact on poor absorption in the gut. So if you are not properly breaking down and absorbing your food, if you have low stomach acid, low enzyme production, which often again go hand in hand with some of these other issues, you're missing out on so many critical vitamins and minerals, even if you're eating them. So, this is where maybe you're someone that has been supplementing with vitamin D forever. You go outside, you get sunlight, but no matter what, vitamin D on your lab work is always low. And for reference, when we're thinking about optimal vitamin D levels, I like to look at a range of 60 to a lot of doctors will, I think they look at it and they're like, oh yeah, 20 is good.
Yeah.
No, that is poor.
Yeah.
That is so bad. And I've seen this with
30 to some to like, I don't know, but the reference rate is rough.
yeah, so that vitamin D and iron are 2 that I see a lot in clients once we fix their digestion and their absorption, where I should share this. I have a client where we got her vitamin D levels when we started, and it was like 28 or something like that, and then I don't know how many months later, it wasn't many, like 4 to 6 months later, we her doctor reran it, and it was like 58. So it was right there. It was right there, and we didn't change anything besides fixing her gut. So same with iron and ferritin, right? That those are two big ones that need stomach acid in order to be absorbed. Another one that relies on stomach acid is going to be B12, others calcium and magnesium and zinc and vitamin A. These require stomach acid. Some of them require bile if they're fat soluble. So that also comes down to having adequate gastric secretions. And then protein. You're not going to properly absorb protein if you don't have sufficient levels of stomach acid. And we won't get into that in this episode, but you get the idea there. So, knowing what we know now, gut impacts hormones, hormones impact gut. What do we do about it? What is the first step, Jess, that you would suggest the listener do if they think that this is part of their issue?
I think the first thing, like, you need to really understand what the root cause of all of this is. So understanding what's going on in the gut. So like we said, first thing I'm going to look at is your gut health. What's going on there? How can we optimize your gut health? For example, like most of the time, I can see low stomach acid with people who, for example, gone from diet to diet or someone who has been chronically stressed, right? So I'm going to start there. Haley and I are going to start with our internal health questionnaire, understand really where all these symptoms are coming from. And with low stomach acid, with motility, for example, with constipation, like we are going to support heavily your GI via food and supplementation. And the first thing I'm going to say is we're going to think about your diet. Like, how can we optimize your diet? What does your hydration status look like? Are you having enough minerals? Fiber. Fiber is so important. Are we adding metamucil, psyllium husk, or are we going to be getting fiber through diet? Dark leafy green vegetables, fruits, and having multiple servings of them a day. Oh, and I'm also going to look at the quality of your diet. So are the foods that you're eating, are they have probiotics and prebiotics? Are you consuming enough B vitamins, magnesium, omega 3 foods, fish, flax seeds, beef, things like that? we can do so much with the diet before we incorporate too many supplements. And again, it's going to be about when can we get you absorbing all of your food, and then we can start incorporating other supplements once we see that gut healing, once you start absorbing your food and feeling a little bit better. The other thing that I'm going to focus on with my clients is exercise. So, how are you moving your body every day? Are you sweating? And this is going to be customized to every single person and what their tolerance level is, especially with the state of their gut health, too.
No, definitely. And I like how you highlighted a few different examples of how we might support dietary intake of fiber and of different foods there, because it really is person to person, mostly dependent upon your symptoms. Your symptoms tell us. Obviously, testing helps if we have it, but we do take a very symptom-based approach. Like Jess mentioned, we have the big questionnaire intake that we do, but some kind of basic things that we might start a client with are, like Jess mentioned, making some simple food swaps. We'll go through their day-to-day intake and say, "Hey, it looks like we're eating maybe a little bit too much bread. Can we swap this out for fruit or for a potato?" Or little things like that to just add more whole food and add more variety to the diet. From there, supplements are going to be very specific to the individual, but we will almost always support liver health if we are having hormonal
Yes.
issues. So whether you have PMS, irregular cycles, period poops, acne, liver health is always going to be crucial. And again, just mentioned that glucuronidase, we're going to want to make sure that we're working on
Yeah.
keeping that down so estrogen can stay in the form that it needs to in our body. It can be detoxed properly, but then as far as other supplementation goes, we'll usually add motility support in if you're constipated, because again, like Jess mentioned, we need to get you pooping while we're digging at the root cause. Like, you need to poop. You
Mhm.
have to. So
Yeah.
while I can't say we use laxatives with our clients, we really very rarely will I tell a client to use Miralax or anything that like
Yeah.
we'll usually pull certain strings with more natural alternatives, like just you
Yeah.
mentioned earlier, like we'll do herbal teas. So ginger is my go-to for constipation, dandelion root as well, especially if you notice like maybe some mucus in your stool or your stool is really hard. That could show that our liver needs a little bit of love. It will also play around with the types of fiber that you're consuming, because some people don't do well with a lot of fiber.
Mm.
If you have a bacterial overgrowth, eating foods like beans and maybe apples and broccoli
Yes.
are gonna make you feel worse. So that's where we'll tap into maybe a psyllium husk supplement or ground flax seeds, kiwis, different
Mhm.
things of that nature. So it is very person to person. So this is where it grinds my gears when somebody goes to the doctor with constipation or IBS and they're like, the doctor tells them to eat more fiber, which is so broad because there are so many different types of fibers that digest so differently. So that's where understanding the different types is going to be it's gonna be really important, and then there are other things that we can do to support our digestive health, like add coconut oil, do aloe vera juice. It'll all depend on where
Yeah.
you're at with your lifestyle, how much you feel like you can take on in your day, financially, mentally, all of that. But the biggest thing is gonna be focusing on understanding your unique situation, your body's unique response hormonally, digestively, and then figuring out what support might need to look like from there. So, Jess, I feel like you've done a really great job with this with your clients, but also with your personal journey of and I would love to hear like what you do differently, follicular versus luteal phase, to prevent
Yeah.
your digestion.
Yeah, I have always suffered with changes, not anymore in the last 6 months, which I'm so thankful for. But this was something I heavily focused on for a very long time. And just if you are in this boat and you do experience these pretty severe changes from follicular to luteal, like it takes a little bit of time. Takes a little bit of time to support your body. So be patient with yourself. Trust yourself that you are doing the right thing. But some of the changes that I would make, so starting with diet in the luteal phase, so I am going to increase more low GI fruits and carbohydrates. And you don't have to go on a low carb diet, but focusing on some low GI foods such as sweet potato, low GI fruits. So think berries, kiwi, and things like that. So I would just ensure that I was incorporating those. Luteal phase, I would always make sure I was having enough fruit. So there is a massive study on 2 kiwis a day
Mm.
helping with constipation. You may even experience your digestion to be, yes, your digestion is going to be a little bit slower because motility is a little bit slower. And so in terms of helping with digestion, that's going to help. with in terms of the more digestion friendly foods. So low GI fruit foods, the 2 kiwis a day, maybe even increasing your fiber in terms of psyllium husk. And then the other important thing is exercise and stress management. Haley talked so much about the vagus nerve, and I want to make sure that you are listening to your body in the luteal phase. How sore are you after training? How intense is your exercise? Do we see inflammation? Do we see high inflammation in the body? Okay, listen to your body. Maybe we have to take an extra rest day. Maybe we need to downregulate exercise one day, but it will be balanced out with your intensity in the follicular phase. So for that's with diet and lifestyle. And the other thing I that is so big is just like slowing down in your luteal phase. That this was huge for me. Like I would be much more susceptible to stress in luteal phase, and a lot of people are feel that way as well. So really, like, how are you managing your stress? You don't have to be a monk every single day, but finding for me a slow morning just like works wonders. Hydrating properly in the morning. These are some of the main things that have really helped me in the luteal phase.
Definitely. And depending on what we suspect is going on hormonally, ideally, when we start with a client, we have labs, but we don't always. And a lot of time, like I mentioned earlier in the episode, we often see low progesterone or just an imbalance of estrogen to progesterone. So this is where if you do deal with heavy amounts of PMS, if you have a regular cycle length, especially if maybe your bleeds some months are 28 days, which is ideal, or some months they're 40 days, some months they're 16. That's very irregular. And what that shows us is that there is an issue with your hormone levels and they're not rising and falling at the right time. So that's where by getting an understanding of what your symptoms might mean, we can tell, hey, do we need some support to lower estrogen? Do we need some support to raise progesterone? What do we need support with? And that's not something that I recommend messing with on your own. I did that unfortunately for too many years and probably made all my issues worse because I was like taking estrogen detox supplements when really all of my hormones were like zero. So, big thing is getting an understanding of where your hormone levels are at. We've done content on this before, with what levels you need to be looking at. But if you want a list of those labs, definitely don't hesitate to shoot me a message on Instagram. But the big thing, like just mentioned, is it is so individualized. It is so person to person. Everybody's cycles are different, everybody's body is different. But by understanding the gist of what's driving your symptoms, you'll be able to make the changes that you need to make. But the biggest thing, again, is always mastering the basics. I feel like something I used to do a lot is and I don't know who I was joking with, who it was Ed or if it might have been you, where the week before my cycle, I'm not allowed to even go on Amazon. Like, I'm not even allowed to do it anymore because not only am I more likely to dopamine seek and like, buy shit that I don't need, but when I was a lot younger, when I first started diving into supplements and all of this stuff forever ago in college, whenever I would feel the least bit off, I would order a new supplement instead of taking a step back and saying, all right, what am I doing well? What am I not? And I would realize that I was being a huge trash panda and I wasn't doing the basic things because before our cycle comes, or if you're stressed, it's a lot easier to gravitate towards the chips and the popcorn and the pretzels instead of, say, the fruit. So that's where starting to notice these little things in the little habits that you lean towards when you're stressed or when you're just not feeling your best is really important because making that one change from eating more of these more processed snacks to more fruit is gonna make a big difference. Same
100%.
can go for if you notice you're a little bit lazier in your luteal phase, which I do as well. I wanna walk less, my desire to move is lower, so if I don't be conscious of that and know that about myself, my steps are lower, and I don't get as outside in the sun as much, and I might not get as much endorphins flowing, so that these are just some things to consider before you go and buy a supplement or even a tea or anything like that. Now, we typically suggest we do everything in combination, but you always have to figure out what those basic things that you personally need to be focusing on are and taking it kind of one step at a time from there.
Yeah, I even have a client, Haley, right now that we just incorporated cruciferous vegetables,
Awesome.
teas, and some therapy work. And she sent me a message and she was like, wow, luteal phase this month was amazing. I was like, wow. What if it's just a few small habits, a few small tweaks that you can make that make a massive difference?
It really is. It really, for most people, is just a few small things. I will
Yeah.
say over the years of doing this, one of the most common improvements that I see within the first 3 months is an improvement in like cycle severity for my clients,
Oh,
whether
yes.
decreased cramping, decreased like heavy bleeding clotty
Yep.
days, decreased constipation beforehand, mood swings, things of that nature, just from cleaning up some of the basics. And if you're somebody that feels like they've already rocked the basics, because I know we've definitely both been this person, and you're still having these symptoms, this is where you should dig deeper into what's
Yep.
going on with your gut. Is there something deeper? But the basics are always that place to start. And if you're listening to this, I hope that you got to take some notes, got some good takeaways of where you can start for yourself. And again, if you haven't already done so, take our gut quiz. If you have any questions at all, reach out to us on social media. We love chatting about this stuff. And I think that's where we'll call it for today. So thank you so much for hanging out with us, and we'll see you next week.